Noah Rasheta, your twin brother.
He's tribe. He's tribe.
Are Mexican Jews. There's a community of Mexican Jews, but you're like the half breed, half Mexican, half Jewish. And that I think is rare.
That's right. That's even rarer than actual Jewish Mexicans. Yeah. My God.
It's rare. It's rare.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's start there with your conversation with Noah. Shall we?
Yeah.
Shall we jump in?
Right, we jumped. I'm jumping.
I wonder, I want to just, can I poke around in your brain?
Poke it. Poke it like it's hot.
It,
Is that what the kids say?
that's what the kids say when you were a kid.
In the year 2000, the distance.
Yeah. The year 2000. Yeah. Yeah, the future. No, I want to ask you, Ankur, I want to ask you sincerely. I feel like you've been kind of taking your concept of purpose around like in a little handkerchief tied to a stick, and you've been trotting the earth, the hills and valleys, and you find these people that you admire, or at least you're curious about what's going on with them. And you sit down with them and you unfold your concept of purpose, and they're like, no, thanks.
Mm-hmm. I did these 2 interviews yesterday.
Yeah.
And it was totally that. It was really funny.
No, I mean, it's most of your interviews. I mean,
Yeah.
So many of these people are like, what are you talking about? That's not how it works for me, And then, so I wonder, I suspect, just from knowing you and being your friend, that you're no less determined to take this knapsack around the world.
I am a misunderstood genius.
You're much like Kanye West.
Yeah, much like he's like the weird like rapper guy who kind of I heard about this where he like freaked out the InfoWars guy and made the InfoWars guy look like the reasonable one.
Yeah. Right. This is the part where we show
awesome.
how little
I love that.
we pay attention
I love that.
to the media. Okay, well, I'm glad you're at least a little abreast of the situation. But so enough about that. I want to ask you, have you revised at least? Or in these, because I'm thinking of Stephen Jenkinson, I'm thinking of Noah, certainly. I mean, we'll jump into that in a second, the purpose of no purpose. And even I would say John Giuliano to a sense, but just there's sort of a string, right? I'm noticing this theme of people kind of rebuffing the offer for purpose. And I do feel that there's always this integral thing alive in you in the conversations, and that after some exchanges, then you settle on some maybe agreement about vocation or calling or passion. But I'm wondering for you, has this changed just by virtue of kind of taking it around? Have the contents of that handkerchief changed form at all for you?
I don't think so. But let me investigate. Let's unwrap it. And we'll see what's in there.
We'll unpack it one more time.
Yeah. So for me, here's what I got. We're here. We exist. We're having a conscious experience. It is not, even though we like to think of it that way in our societies, it is not an individual conscious experience. We are here. We're only here because the rest of us are here.
Mm-hmm.
This is this beautiful thing in that article from Martin Luther King I read the other day. Like when I drink my orange juice or make my granola in the morning, thousands or millions of people are participating in that act with me, because there's no way that I grew those oats or processed them or rolled them or anything, or made the tractor that made that possible for those oats, and take it all the way out. So we're having this conscious experience in community only by dint of the gratitude and involvement of all these other people. Most of us have to deal with the economy. That's just like a part of our lives. And what's in my little handkerchief around purpose is that there is an intersection in the kind of Venn diagram sense. There's an intersection between the things that make me the most happy the things that I feel like the most myself, I'm doing them, and the way in which I can contribute to others. That's really at the core. That's what I'm promoting. If I had a religion,
Mm-hmm.
that would be what my religion is selling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's totally, nobody gets it. Nobody gets it. I had this podcast interview with this guy, Jeremy, guy I like. We're going to talk about it soon. You haven't heard it yet.
Okay. I'm in suspense.
My usage of the word service was like a no-no for him. He couldn't do it.
Because it implicated what? And just acknowledging, we'll circle back to this later in the Jeremy debrief, but just because you mentioned it, why? What was it about that?
For him, it was really, he identifies himself as doing something that is personally valuable to him. He calls selfish. And for him, the word service was totally incompatible with the word selfish. So he's in this dialectic of selfishness and altruism.
I see.
Which we talked about. It was great.
Great. We'll discuss that.
But all these words, purpose, service, contribution, people just don't like these words.
Sure. But is this something that's just inherent to words? Because I guess what I'm getting at here is that what I hear you saying, and maybe this is how it plugs back into the discussion with Noah, is that purpose for you, or in the way that you're traveling around the world with it, is not fundamental. It's not something that is there latent in the universe for us to derive through some math. Rather, it's a skillful means for us to participate in this thing called the economy. In part, right? This is what you say, an intersection of this collaborative effort of existence, but then this layer of the economy where we have to sort of justify that existence.
That's a part of it, but it's not black and white. I think there's everything you said, I think is true. And I think there is part of it that is there to be discovered. I think much of it is to be created and much of it is to be discovered. This is paradox and there's this mystery, but it's the things that I am most into, the things that these questions, the coaching questions, what would you do if you weren't paid? What could you never stop doing even if you tried? Those things, some of them we chose and some of them were just I don't know why I'm so into this, but I'm into it. I didn't my whole thing is togetherness and community and parties. I'm not I didn't necessarily choose all of that disposition or inclination. I just noticed at a certain point that wow, even though if I were to come up with a purpose for myself when I was in college, it would have been to be a mathematician. I had all this interest in math my whole life. I was in math competitions, blah, blah, blah. But it turns out that if you look at the experience of my life, I'm more interested in partying than I am in math. And I mean, that's a really positive way of getting people together, getting the best out of people, being constructive, not just drinking, but actually the experience of what can happen when humans are together, open-hearted, honest, what kind of synergies can occur, kind of beauty, listening. That's turns out I would have thought that, but that's more important to me than working on math.
Okay. And so you follow it. And let's put a pin maybe in this very high level thing and jump into maybe more of the specifics of the conversation with Noah, because I think that we'll come back around and maybe unite. I hope.
Yeah. And he's just so great. Yeah, I don't want to distract him, but this is nice.
This is nice. Yeah. And I think maybe it's also kind of on a certain level tracing both the conversation with Noah and also how you've been proceeding with this development of the idea of purpose and the development of your purpose. So if we look at your life now, we see a lot of that. We see a lot of those things. You're throwing events. You're having these conversations with people. We're doing this podcast thing. We have this program that we do. And in that program, we work and focus and talk and discuss this thing, purpose. And actually, a big part of that assessment is looking back and seeing retrospectively, what have you been up to? What have you been interested in? And where does that lead you next? And it's a non-ideological way. It's not that you have something that you can derive there, you'll know it, and then you'll take it, you'll put it in your pocket, and it's kind of reductive in that way. And I think that's the part that people are like, maybe that's the reaction that people have. And that when Noah says, how can you have a purpose? This existence is the purpose.
Which is also true, right?
Yeah.
But and that's the thing in that conversation. Everything he said, I love it. Totally
Chef's kiss. Okay.
And
when
when I push back, and I was like, well, hey, there's a reason you're doing what you're doing, and not like being a park ranger at a national park.
But his reason that he gives is because I like to.
Which is exactly what I'm saying.
Because, okay. So that's why I think we're okay. And now maybe the listener is also on the same page. Me and you are on the same page. Hopefully we're on the same page with Noah. Perhaps we're probably still not even close to being on the same page with Stephen Jenkinson. But I hope one day to get on his page, because I think there's also something to that too, right? This kind of response to the idea of increase, or if I find my purpose, then I can derive a certain amount of metrics behind that. I can create the business. I can make $1 million, and then I've optimized myself in some extreme virtue or some example of human, and then I've become like this ultimate power figure, and it's really very self-aggrandizing. And none of the figures that I see you interested in are coming from that angle.
No,
it's really more about how can I give back? So I hear Noah saying, I have this gift. It's already, what more, right? It's already replete of existence, of conscious. I'm having this experience. He says, I get to have this experience. And so then the very next thing is, well, then not only that, I get to interact with it. And so it's in that interaction. And so that's why I think we can zoom back and start right at the beginning. And I think you guys, you start the conversation by talking about your process with bread baking, which I think is a great place to start, because it's very simple. It's uncomplicated for you, right? Bread baking is uncomplicated for you. There's not a lot of convoluted, there's not a lot of drama. You don't have to figure, you don't have to optimize. I mean, you have to measure, you have to do it well.
It's the opposite of entrepreneurship.
It's the opposite of marketing funnels. It's the opposite of Facebook ads. But why?
I love it.
Because you like it, right? I mean, because you like it. Yeah. And it started as a gift.
Yeah, it started as a wedding vow
to your wife.
This person that I love, who I love, decided to come to this really foreign place, United States of America. We chose together where to live. She was like, I want to get the hell out of France. We looked at some places in India where I'd lived, some places in South America and here. And she's like, that place is cool. Let's go there. So, but as a result of that, she was very far from something really close to her heart. Just dope ass French bread. You can't get it. You can't get it here. Like where I live, in the rural corner of the United States. There's a few bakeries. There's like 2 bakeries in Seattle where you could get bread that would like fit her standards. Yeah. 2.5 hours.
And you're a few hours outside of Seattle.
That was part of my wedding vows, to make sure she had bread, which, because we lived here, meant that I had to make it or get someone else to make it. So that's right. That's the origin.
That's the origin. And it proceeded like pretty organically. I imagine the first couple.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly. Probably, horrible. I mean, she says it was pretty good from the beginning, but I'm guessing it took like a couple months to get to where I was like, all right, I feel like in the zone with it.
But now you're 8 years into it.
Yeah.
And it's evolved as like this central activity to all this community building that you do. And it's become this thing.
It's crazy. It's become my shtick. And it's really like, now I'm kind of into it. So, okay, like, yeah, I mean, this is so great. Like, we all want to just, like Uncle Marshall, NBC, Marshall Rosenberg. It's like our deepest desire is to contribute to the lives of others. And it just makes it so, except for those glutards.
Excuse me?
The people who identify as being gluten-free. My friend Reed,
just alienated like 90% of our audience.
Dude, I don't think it's a bad word. My friend Reed, that's how he describes himself. I'm a glutard.
I want to check our
Martin, edit that out, man.
Yeah.
Don't get me canceled.
Martin. Well, just don't get him canceled. Can you do some focus group on that? Where does that stand? Okay, I'm flagging it, but yeah.
Except for the people who are gluten free, I just like have an immediate like here's a way I can clearly contribute to your life. You know, it's really beautiful because I make it every day, and I make 4 loaves every day, and so it's like this dynamic where I just have to. I'm running around trying to give away the bread every day. I don't know how we got onto this. If this is useful, thank you.
Well, no, I'm not leading you. I have you here. Don't worry. You're held. You're held here. I mean, so what you start to examine with Noah then, and we've talked about the ideas of Moshe Feldenkrais a couple times on this podcast, and it's because it's something that's close to me and it's something I study. And Moshe Feldenkrais has this really central to his ideas are these ideas of compulsion and spontaneity. And he has this whole theory that then follows from that of how we live in our bodies when we're in a compulsive mode of being. Or I think even Noah says this kind of automated mode of being. It doesn't have the quality of awareness, and it certainly doesn't have the sort of joy and energy of spontaneity. And I think one of the misconceptions of the use of spontaneity in that way is that it's something that would just be like very frivolous or you do on a whim. But it's that it's something you've really chosen to do because you want to do it. It's aligned with your own body's impulses and intentions to satisfy something. So, for instance, drinking a glass of water, for most people, is a pretty uncomplicated process. It doesn't come with a lot of tension in the body. Their movement is very clear when they do it. It's just uncomplicated, simple. You're thirsty, you drink the water. Whereas if you watch someone smoke a cigarette, they contort themselves in all these kind of crazy shapes and tensions, because there's not that clear. It's not that, it starts to get a little complicated when we get into this struggle of, I want to do it, but I don't think I should, or I should do it, but I don't think and so he says something that I think gets to the point of this, that implicit in I should is I don't want to.
You talking about Noah or Moshe?
No, Moshe Feldenkrais says implicit in should is I don't want to. And this is what I was reminded of hearing you and Noah talk in the beginning about the bread baking and a path of life that is not pursued for something else or because you think you ought to be doing it, you think you should be doing it, but you just do it because you want to. And it's uncomplicated in that way. And I wonder, it's a different take on purpose. And I think this is really the entry point of the conversation. I'm glad it was, because it's a little bit more lighthearted. We start talking about purpose.
Yeah.
And it invites this sense of some of our other guests that are working with the concept of play, right? And to really follow that. Is anything I'm saying kind of resonating or making you remember your conference? Do you remember talking about any of these things?
I mean, the real sense I'm getting here, like we've been talking about this for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You're not entering to any of the content in the interview. I think you didn't listen to it.
I just finished listening to it. I have a whole page of notes. This is going to be a 4-hour debrief, by the way. Martin, cut that, leave that part in. Now I'm going to embarrass Ankur with the precision of my note taking. All right, so you didn't like that. Yeah, but he talks about breaking from the autopilot mode. And to me, this is compulsion. And to me, this is living with a very complicated, tense sense of achieving. And this isn't and I think this is what's often confused for purpose.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Am I getting to the point yet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel it.
Okay. I'll move on with point number 2 in my note sheet. he said, but he says the benefits are not the goal, right? It's not that you're doing this thing for all of the skills, or in the case of the Dharma, or if you're practicing yoga, I think, like in the world of the yoga, it's like all these cities could emerge, right, from your enlightenment. But there's some paradox there, right? Because what Noah's saying is, it's not the pursuit of the thing for those second, third order benefits. It's for the pleasure and the experience of doing the thing itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is really what, again, I think this is part of this notion of purpose that I'm trying to sell to people in my new demystified purpose religion that I'm creating.
Good. That's what I'm helping you do on this episode. I feel like you're not really receiving the gift of me fucking with you today. And
No,
I don't like it, because that's my purpose.
It's good. No, it's really good.
It's what I enjoy fucking with you. I think it helps you.
It does.
It makes me feel good. So
yeah,
receive the gift.
It is good. Is that this it's really about the joy. Yeah. And so the idea of having some sort of goal or purpose that's not about the joy, then I think you can really get into this disconnected achievement bit. Or it's even if it's connected to like approval, which a lot of them are, right? Like if the goal is about like exogenous approval from outside versus like endogenous, like, oh man, this is how I want to live. This is how I want to create. This is how I want to contribute. This is how I want to be. There's just so much more durable energy coming from that. It's so much more natural. We're definitely going to get better faster because we're practicing more, because we're just so into it. It's like following them. It's following the joy,
Enjoying the interest. Okay. So then quickly, then it becomes complex immediately as soon as you say that, because you'll embark on that. Maybe it's not everything in this world is as simple as your journey with baking bread.
Well, definitely not. It's not my vocation.
Yeah. All of a sudden there is things that are not, you're not feeling the experience of joy as you pursue the thing that does ultimately bring you some deeper or richer experience. And I think so. Then tracing your conversation with Noah to prove to you and validate my role in this podcast and justify my existence of being here, this fucking rationalize the purchase of this microphone, is then and immediately then there's like this thing about self-judgment, self-criticism. I'm not doing the thing good enough. How can I do it better? All the challenges that you encounter. Not to mention, as I really love this, is that there's this thing, this metaphor that goes throughout the conversation, this game of chess.
Oh, the chess versus Tetris thing. Man, that's so good. That was a real gift.
It's good, chess versus Tetris, but it's really chess versus there's actually no game. You thought there was some rules here that you set for yourself by which you could succeed and get the validation you're looking for. And then something happens that completely turns that on its head. And we've talked about this with a lot of guests, or this rite of passage moment, this moment of crisis or loss. In Noah's case, it's this crisis with his marriage, which he then makes him feel like he's not a good Christian. If he could only do the chess game harder or better, then he would be living his purpose. But so actually that discovery, or that process of him going to that groundlessness he's talking about, uses that in a very positive way, right? Or actually the goal is this groundlessness from the Buddhist perspective. That it's actually that crisis. It's not, so you wouldn't say that's connected to joy. It's actually a profound recognition of suffering and connecting to that suffering that then takes him to this acceptance, right? And he says, of just being me, comfortable in my own skin. And then that's where then the inquiry starts to unfold from there. So just to put another little wrinkle in this is that it's not always joyful. Sometimes it really sucks, like profoundly sucks.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what we're talking about with that whole conversation about joy and the intersection of what I love doing with what the world needs, that's for me, the whole, from the beginning, the economy, the fact that we live in community as a species and not just like one individual isolated. That's all about how we contribute to the whole. What's known as vocation, right? But that's like, I'm not saying that the existential process or the process of coming to awareness of who we are, just the entire like personal development, enlightenment, self-awareness, that whole project, healing that we're all on, whether we want to be on it or not, that's necessarily always joyful. I mean, it's usually the contrary, right?
Okay, so let's stop right there. So like that was sort of the fulcrum of your conversation with him, is this like, is the vocation and purpose. He said, well, you have a message. He goes, yeah, my message is I really like this stuff. I was doing some software design. I was like doing some marketing. He's basically doing what we do. He was like, I got to stop doing this. I got to make more time to just talk about hang gliding and Buddhism. And that becomes his whole thing. And he just pursues that because it's what he wants to do, right? I mean, but I wonder, like, you don't want to pursue bread baking as your vocation. It's not what you do all day, every day.
No, it's perfect. I have like achieved perfect with my relationship to bread baking.
At least in that one corner of your day.
Yeah, that part is perfect.
So maybe it's okay. So then the other thing that comes up while we're talking about this is what this idea, and maybe you could help me understand this better because you guys don't spend a lot of time on it. But he talks about this, the co-emergence of wisdom. Were you already familiar with that concept from your?
I think conceptually, yeah, but not in his vocabulary, like the specific words he used. Yeah,
this idea of co-emergence, it comes from Pema Chodron's book, I think, is what he referenced immediately before he said that, and he gives the example of anger.
Yeah, do you want to just give the whole example so people have?
Yeah, so he gives his example of anger, and he says there's co-emergent with that anger, arising mutually with that anger, is actually a deep wisdom with that experience. And that we can be in reactivity to that. And we can be in aversion to that. We can push it away. We don't want the anger. That's not how we like to see ourselves. And the shift he mentions is that then there's some point where you can start to welcome it and be with it.
Yeah.
And invite whatever teaching is there, the wisdom that comes from it.
Yeah. Again, man, it's one of these kind of integral moves. Because at a certain point in our development, this is like the toddler phase of our development, either as an individual or as a society, the anger comes, and the natural thing to do is just to express it by hitting someone or throwing a tantrum or using the maximum of whatever power that being has. And it's great that toddlers don't have more power than they do, because it could be dangerous, right? Like,
unless they're the president of the United States.
Right. So they're just like expressing their anger. And then there's this other point where we're just like, oh, I've just read all these Buddhist texts and I'm so interested in personal development and I don't experience emotion, right? Like where I've really learned how to disconnect my sensations of anger from having to act on it immediately.
Yeah.
And I'm also not getting the wisdom from it.
Right.
And then there's a level like Noah's talking about where we can have the best of both worlds and not immediately slap our friend or conversation partner for saying what they said, and yet tune into what is the wisdom of that moment and be like, oh, wait, there's, this is a book that I really like, the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership.
Oh, right. You've talked about that.
Mom was just going off about that book. I love it. And one of the chapters is about emotions. And there's a line in there. I think they got this, the authors are just taking great ideas from their teachers and other books. And I forget who they got this idea from, but that anger means a boundary has been crossed. And so that just stuck with me. So now every time I experience anger, I look for that insight, be like, okay, what was the boundary that was crossed? Who crossed it? I cross it? Did Nate cross it? What happened? What is the belief system that I had that allowed there to be a boundary, a supposed boundary? Like my wife crossed this boundary. Like what was the belief system of like the property relationships between me and my wife that allowed for me to think that a boundary had been crossed? Like I can then go into the whole thing and determine like, all right, what am I learning from this experience?
I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's the tie-in that could possibly make the first part of our conversation relevant, this episode relevant to the rest of the season, or at least season 4. And because right, what we've said about nonviolent communication before, which to me was extremely useful in being able to actually apply it, that it's not just some, hey man, just be cool. Like it's not just about passivity.
Yeah.
It's actually about the most expedient tool to get what I want out of the situation. It's actually that. It's actually expedient. And I think Noah grounds that. His worldview, or what he's offering in your conversation, in that sensibility. So he says this. He says he had this shift from grounding himself in the answers. So it was a world where he had to be right. It was right versus wrong before. And he talks about shifting to actually grounding yourself in the questions themselves. And then you take right or wrong off the table.
Wow.
And now all of a sudden you have this other continuum, not right or wrong, but skillful and less skillful. So what's the actual expedient means for this?
Oh, God.
And so that's interesting to me, is when all of a sudden these things like nonviolence, or, like Jeremy has this like reaction to, some like perhaps insinuation of altruism, which maybe means collectivism, which maybe means, so all of a sudden you're in this whole story with worldviews and capitalism or something, right? But to bring everything back to this thing of like all of these, the act of service, having a purpose, contributing, this is a more efficient way. This is a more efficient way. And it's a different game, right? It might not be the ultimate game. And he's also saying that's like, we have the humility that intelligence scaled to infinity, we're closer to the ant than we are to God. That's another, I love that.
Yeah.
Right? So, but all of this means that we don't have to it lets us off the hook of having to have the answers and have fights with people about who is right or wrong. And then we get to enter into this very practical play or dance or song of what we're creating together.
Yeah. And I like that you bring it back to that, because it is efficient and it's also beautiful. It's not just efficient. It's a beautiful exploration. And when you recapped his point about right and wrong, the answer, focusing on the answer, and then the shifting to focusing on the question, I heard it again, maybe for the third time when you said that. And it struck me in this new way of that's what a successful relationship is built on. Like when we're in this phase of like wanting to be right and being concerned about the answers, it's really, from my experience, very hard to make that compatible with a successful relationship. Because the priority is on the answer.
Yeah.
And to be like in an investigation with another human, the priority's got to be on the question. It's got to be on this thing that's between us, rather than like the answer is like, the right answer is like my thing over here, or your.
Yeah. Well, could you then by extension say that that's the case? Perhaps, neither of us know. We don't have the answer. But that by extension, your relationship with life could operate similarly. That when you are in relationship with life in a place of inquiry, it's just a different set of, right?
That's beautiful. Yeah. I think that's really channeling Noah there too.
Yeah. A wife or life or, whatever, you're in relationship. One thing that's guaranteed is that relationship is going to prove to you that you do not have all the answers.
Yeah.
That's unescapable.
Yeah. Inescapable.
Okay. There's one more piece here. I know we've gone long for a debrief. There's one more piece here that I hope you can help me understand better.
Okay.
It's in the kind of, I think, the thread of what we've been discussing. Noah says this thing, he corrects himself. He goes, all I have to do is be conscious. And then he goes, no, I get to be conscious, right? He corrects himself. So this thing is operating. It's already happening. Like, there's nothing you need to do. You are conscious. Yeah. Some like kind of grace there. Some idea of grace maybe is present. Like it's the table's already set and you have this gift of life, this experience of life. My question is about even how to articulate it. Things can be better. Like we can improve things. Mm-hmm. We see something wrong, or we see something like that's not it, and we can engineer it, or we can make it better. We can watch it. We can observe it. We can change it. Right? We have that capacity. It's like part of our intelligence, maybe not consciousness. Maybe that's what intelligence is. But then my question also is: are there degrees of how close you are to that awareness? Right. So going back to this sort of like these two sides of compulsive or spontaneous, or you could also maybe say aware and automatic, right? These different modes. I believe that there is some gradients there, some scale of how disassociated we are. So there's lots of things I can do to not be aware, to not be present. There's all kinds of behaviors I can engage in, thoughts I can engage in. So in that scale of getting closer to this, because it's interesting. It's like on one hand, there's this paradox here, right? That Noah's saying. It's like on one hand, it's groundless, do nothing, don't strive. And yet by degrees, we can become more present to what this is. And should we, right? So it's maybe back to this original paradox of striving or pursuing. Is right making any sense there?
Is there a question? Is there a question?
Yeah. Do you believe in that? Do you believe in that? There's like the pursuit. So for instance, you meditate, right?
Yeah. Okay. I get it. So I've been exposed to this idea for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Which idea? It would be helpful for me if you repeated what you thought I just said.
That there's no striving, that there's no need to strive, that it's all here. It's all imminent. It's all in this moment. And I've had moments of really apprehending that, transcendental experiences, mystical experiences.
Right.
I was like, oh my God, I'm one with all being. It's all here in this moment. Wonderful. Mm-hmm. But when I'm not having that experience, which is the vast majority of my life,
right,
I cannot relate to that at all. I'm like, I'm here doing things to like improve.
Right.
And this is where like when Stephen Jenkinson's telling me that all growth is somehow bad.
Right. So this is what I'm at. This is what I'm stuck on.
I'm unable to relate. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, of course. I'm the first guy to tell you that all the different kinds of growth that are bad and that are toxic and that are like cancerous and this and that. Sure. But the fact that I want to meditate, or Noah, presumably, we didn't talk about his meditation practice, but presumably he's meditating. The fact that he's like making that decision to meditate once or twice a day seems totally reasonable to me. It doesn't seem we shouldn't be doing those things, but there's this real difference. And this is where we got to, this is where we started the conversation really.
Yes. Yeah.
And when we do those things, how we're feeling, and his whole shtick of be who you are.
Yeah.
I think really tries to approach that of like, all right, like really be who you are at this moment. If you're the guy who doesn't want to meditate, it's like there's very little point to meditating when you're identified with not wanting to meditate, or there's something in there of like,
right.
Often we're forcing ourselves to do things. I don't know. This is not going to be clear because
no, it is clear. And it is traced to this idea of forcing yourself and being compulsive in this mode of striving. And I think it is like, it's difficult. I grant you that, but I think that's why we're doing this. It's difficult to articulate, and it might be difficult for our listener to articulate the difference between that mode of striving and pursuing what you're offering here as an idea of purpose. of connection. And so I think what's helpful is to put it in this mode of skillful action, which was not Noah, that's the Buddha, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to ground in this sense of inquiry instead of having the answers. And then once we're there is, as soon as you say skill, there's a development of skill.
Yeah.
And this development of skill is not the same as this sort of rivalrous dynamic of growth and pursuit and acquisition. It's a different kind of sensitivity to yourself. Who you are and what you feel is what I heard Noah saying a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah, I like that.
Cool. All right. Thank you all so much for sticking with us on that.
There's
one more thing, dear listener.
So
one more thing.
We lost some of the interview because the audio was bad in the middle. So some of it got lost. And I don't think this was in the part that gets lost, but it overlaps with it. So I just want to celebrate something about Noah.
Yeah. Okay, please do. Right. Oh, I see.
So this guy was a Mormon missionary. And his understanding of the divine and religion and God has totally changed. He's now this like amazing Buddhist podcaster guy. And yet he was able to relate to his days as a Mormon missionary and understand how that younger version of himself was really following his passion or his purpose or his best light at the time without criticizing that guy and without like endorsing him either. And I just found that to be totally heroic.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, since we're going to keep it going, I'll something else Noah said, which I think is actually my takeaway, which is actually a skill that I think anybody could just go employ right away. It's something his current self might say to his previous self. It's something you could say to someone who is in passionate opposition to your viewpoint, which is that I also feel strongly about things. And that to me does sum up a lot of his orientation.
Yeah.
Because in that we're then united, in that we both feel strongly about things. And then we can start maybe even another conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for having this conversation with me, Ankur. Thank you for following me through all the places where it looked like we were going to get lost, but I think we found our way home. And again, thank you to the listeners, and we'll talk to you next time.
Hi, everyone. This is Martin San, your producer. I just want to take a minute to thank you for listening to our show. 10,000 Heroes is brought to you by the team at Momentum Lab. Pierre does our artwork, DJ Plainview composed our theme music, and I handle all the editing and production. If you like the show, please follow it, rate it, tell all your friends about it, and write to us. That really helps us make the impact we want to make. And now, we're closing this episode with a word from our main sponsor, who also happens to be our host, Ankur.
And now a message from our sponsor, me again. 10,000 Heroes is brought to you by Momentum Lab. I normally refer to Momentum Lab as a coaching program or a goal accelerator, but it's really more like a master's degree in life. When you join Momentum Lab, we help you get crystal clear on what it is you actually want, who you want to be, what you want to do, and how you want to contribute. And then we get into all the painful details of what has been blocking you this whole time. And then we give you the knowledge, the tools, and the support you need to get there. Sometimes that's a spreadsheet, sometimes it's a mindset hack, sometimes it's a lecture, and sometimes it's a hug. Our only attachment is to your higher self. So, when you're ready to be the next version of yourself, in your business, for your family, or just for your own sense of fulfillment, drop me a line. Bye!